Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is 10 o'clock in the Eastern United States. I'm coming to you today from the head office of CoreALM, which is in Clearwater, Florida. My name is Steve Oken. I'm the president of CoreALM, and I'm excited to get into today's topic. Today I have a guest speaker. He's going to be walking through a bit of a demonstration to guide us through how we can actually take advantage of extended clean core control. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. This will help you to align your process. We're going to focus on Cloud ALM. We have a few alternatives for you to do that, but we'll focus today's conversation on Cloud ALM. We'll talk about how you can have cross-functional kind of value stream teams that allow you to bridge across all of your developments, so you kind of align on building a full value stream and process-based delivery, so business-focused deliveries, which is one of the major tenets of Clean Core, but allows you to sort of keep all your platforms in sync. And so we're going to get into that topic. I'm excited about that. Valjan Spihia is a CoreALM architect. He is very familiar with application lifecycle management capabilities, part of SAP, as well as standard enterprise tools. He's led many implementations, and he can give you some real insight on how you can take advantage of best practices in this regard. So as we get into the topic, I'm just going to introduce CoreALM, where we come from, how we got to where we are today, and then a little bit about what we can do, what is our kind of main purpose here, and it sort of ties back into this topic. So just as part of our intro story, in case you're new to CoreALM, we've been in business for over 15 years at this point. The company was founded when our CEO and founder left his position at SAP. Many of our team worked at SAP prior to coming to start and to join CoreALM. So Labanat was the head of the application lifecycle management practice at SAP. And at the time, he was basically looking at the landscape of service providers that were out there at the time, and there was really no service provider that was specifically focused on application lifecycle management in the SAP realm for SAP customers specifically. And so he founded CoreALM to just do exactly that, to serve application lifecycle management needs for SAP customers. And one of the things that we noted is that at the time, Solution Manager was, becoming quite popular. SAP was pushing that as kind of their main ALM tool. But we also recognized that many of our customers used other tools like Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow, as well as other additional tools. Now, of course, Cloud ALM is on the scene. And so what we try to do is to provide some clarity on, what's the best use of those tools. But it was about 2018, we really saw an opportunity to unify the process and to start bringing together those tools and really build integrations between those enterprise-wide tools and the SAP tools that exist, so that you can have kind of one end-to-end process that covers SAP and non-SAP. That was the goal, and that's what we're still working to achieve. We have many customers that have implemented our technology, have put large volumes of transactions through our software. We meet all of the security requirements of some of the most stringent kinds of environments. We work in financial industries, defense, and military applications. Validated solutions that are required, like FDA validation, like pharma or life sciences, medical type environments. And, we've really covered the gamut. We also have, smaller customers as well, of course. So we really like to think about what we do as part of an overall business transformation suite. And we see business transformation as a continuous cycle. And we're going to talk about that today. And it really relates to how do you keep your core clean. It's not just about minimizing code changes or minimizing the the development that you do within your core environment, whether that's S4 ABAP changes that you need to make. It's also about understanding how you can best leverage the standard capabilities of SAP so that you're not building customizations where it's not required. Of course, as you get into it, and this is why it's a continuous cycle, you will find that there need to be continuous improvements. And this could be, the improvement could be a big business transformation program that you're launching, S4 implementation. It could be a system upgrade where you want to take advantage of some of the new capabilities, or just simply update your technology to the latest version. Or it could be maintenance updates, which could be, achieving new business benefits that you want to achieve, or solving technical issues. Whichever your initiative is, if it's small or large, the process should be pretty much the same. And that is to start from the perspective of what are the business improvements that I'm seeking to achieve. There's many tools that we can use to help us to track this, but it's very important to start with that mindset of what is the business objective that we're trying to achieve. And then, of course, there's many tactical steps that you need to do. Keep track of your requirements, your work items, agile delivery activities, which really goes under managing the projects and maintaining the solution. And then, of course, there's the deployment aspect where you have to take that code and put it into production through some sort of a process that allows you to get the proper certifications and approvals from your compliance teams. So that's the thing. And then, of course, at the end, you want to be able to monitor to see that you actually achieved the business process improvements that you sought out to achieve, or what's the point? And then, of course, from those insights as to, what are you learning about your monitoring? How do you achieve your metrics? You can then go back through the loop and you can plan your next round of enhancements. And this is a continuous process. The challenge is many people see this as a continuous process, but the challenge is there's many tools out there that companies use to do this, and those tools support various capabilities. So each of these steps has a list of capabilities that are needed in order to deliver an end-to-end process. But the problem is that there's many different tools that companies use to do those activities. And those tools aren't always integrated or plugged into each other. So what ends up happening is some of the information exists in one tool, but it doesn't flow to the next, to the next, to the next. So either we have a disconnected process. In some cases, we have a process for SAP and then a process for non-SAP. And many changes require changes both to SAP and non-SAP, or even within SAP, the core changes and your BTP changes, which are your side-by-side extensions that you do in the business technology platform of SAP. So we want to really have a unified process where everybody follows the exact same process using the same tools, ideally, or the best tool for the job, but there's a continuous integration of data, and there's seamless formation data is flowing between those systems. There's no need to do duplication of effort across those tools. Cloud ALM definitely helps with a bunch of it. Jira is very common, and Azure DevOps more for agile or DevOps style delivery outside of SAP. Signavio is definitely a part, especially on the process side of things. Tricentis has tools to help with the testing aspects, and ServiceNow is often involved in approvals for the actual release into production. Many other tools that are out there that support these flows. So it's about, really what is CoreALM's job? We see ourselves as a unification layer to try to give you one consistent process using the tools of your choice, but allowing you to actually have the information flow in a way that is continuous and consistent across SAP, non-SAP, core, and BTP, or on non-core SAP changes across the board. So that's the goal. We have many different products that we use to achieve this. Some are connectors on Solution Manager. So for people that are using Charm or Focus Build, still obviously Solution Manager is going out of mainstream support in 2027. So it's still there. Many customers continue to use it. We have tools, and they've been around for some time, that allow you to integrate with that application. On the Cloud ALM side, there's new capabilities. Not everything in Solution Manager is replaced as part of Cloud ALM, but there's many capabilities that exist there, and we provide integrations for those capabilities as well. And if you wish, you can choose to use our transport management tools, where we orchestrate the process for managing transports in a way that is as full and robust as what you would expect from Solution Manager Charm, but doesn't have any dependency on either Solution Manager or Cloud ALM. And so you can take your change management process and embed it directly into the tool of your choice, whether that be Jira, Azure DevOps, or ServiceNow. And some customers even have multiple, where they use Jira for projects, transports, and ServiceNow for maintenance transports, and that's perfectly doable as well using our direct management tools. That is the product flow. In terms of the benefits of what you can expect to achieve, really the goal is to look for how can we really shift left and automate these steps to accelerate the delivery of SAP related changes. This can be done, by automating things like code quality or vulnerability checks. It could be, running all of the sort of checks on your code to make sure that you've met all of your dependencies, that the sequencing is correct, and really making sure that you're not causing problems later on down the road when you go to import those into production. We can do all those checks up front. We can also run automated testing or do change impact analysis in an automated way. All of that is enabled by this kind of orchestrated workflow. And then again, same process, nothing different for SAP, just maybe some additional checks and balances that you can add in, but you follow the same process across all of your enterprise changes, whether you're using Jira or Azure DevOps as your leading tool. We can sort of give you that same consistent flow, or ServiceNow, give that same consistent flow and build those automations into the process to make sure that you're moving quickly. Last, I just want to sort of cover off where you can get additional information. We do publish a weekly newsletter that is published on LinkedIn. The barcode in the top left corner of your screen will give you the direct link to that, or you can just search for the SAP ALM Navigator on LinkedIn. And if you subscribe to that, you'll be updated for each of our weekly newsletters as they get published onto the LinkedIn platform. We also post those on our website. The barcode will take you to where you can subscribe to that feed. We also have our resources page on our website. This is where we publish upcoming webinars. Those are also published on LinkedIn. So you can find out about those upcoming topics, subscribe to those. If you can't make a given session, I still recommend you, if you're interested in the topic, subscribe to the, or sign up for the event, and we will send you a recording after the event. And then if you wish to actually get, usually we have customers who want a guided demonstration where they can ask some more custom questions tailored to their specific use case. If you want to do something like that, or even just to have a discussion about your environment to see if there's something that we can do to help, best is to, you can scan the barcode in the bottom right corner of your screen, or you can go to our website, CoreALM.com, and in the top right corner of your screen, you'll see the Talk to an Expert button. Click on that and then fill out the form, and that comes to us, and we can get back in touch with you and do a guided demonstration. We can launch a proof of concept and give you much more clarity on how this can be used within your environment. That's what I have for you today. At this point, I'd like to invite our guest, Waldron Spihai. Waldron, welcome. And I will give you control to share your screen whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here. Again, as Steve introduced me, my name is Waldron Spihai, SAP Solution Architect with CoreALM. And in today's webinar, the goal is to Steve already alluded to, so we're going to go through an overview of the Clean Core and key benefits. We're also then going to dive deep into an introduction to SAP Signavio and Cloud ALM, and also really combine these two topics together of how these two tools can support your clean core strategy and what are the benefits by using these two tools as well. At the end, if you have enough time, we're also going to go through a walkthrough and demonstration of all of these different slides and then information that we're going to provide throughout this webinar. So initially, to start with, by really addressing the core strategy and the 5 pillars to the right, which is around primarily what makes a clean core, around business processes, accessibility, data, integration, and operations. We're going to try to touch base on each one of these 5 different pillars and how these two tools can support this strategy. But the 2 main ones that we our goal to keep into mind today is going to be around business processes. So, for example, how do we enhance standard solutions without having to modify these business processes, for example, or at least have some type of governance where the changes that we're making are necessary in order for us to implement them. And then we're going to go through primarily of how do you do that in SAP Signavio, but also how do you complement that with SAP Cloud ALM as well. And then, whenever we need to add an additional design, how do we do that? The second pillar that we're going to touch base on is going to be around to extensions and how do we avoid, for example, any type of traditional extensions within, let's say, in your ABAP stack or in your SAP environment, and you use some of the side-by-side or extended SAP changes that you can decouple from your SAP environment. So whenever you need to, for example, make additional changes to those that are not necessarily impacting your specific environment, and you can continuously go through upgrades and enhancing your environment without having to do this massive testing because of extensions that were built on top of your ABAP stack. Then as well, we'll also touch base a little bit on the data to manage data quality as well, and including integrations as well. How do we avoid using any type of standard, let's say, API such as the iDocs and RFCs and etc., and use more of the OData or SOAP, for example, to extend any of your applications, including SAP Integration Suite and how you would manage those let's say, ABAP transports using SAP Cloud ALM. So, for example, you have total governance of those ABAP SAP transports as well, and how Cloud ALM supports that. And then last but not least, around operations, Cloud ALM has a wide variety of KPIs that you can monitor your environment, for example, and then how does that support also your clean core strategy as well. So to dive a little bit more deep into the transformation suite that we're going to talk about today around SAP Signavio, what are some of the processes, for example, that you're able at least at minimum start with to analyze those and enhance if needed, for example, without jeopardizing the clean core strategy. And then in addition to that, once we get into Cloud ALM, then we'll take over around mainly designing that process, for example, also then designing the solution as well, building it, which we're going to use different, for example, transfer strategies, and then testing the solution as well. And last but not least, obviously, we always have to deploy that solution using Cloud ALM and then ongoing enabling that process, for example, including making additional changes. So we're going to go through this entire strategy in today's webinar of how these two tools complement each other. Now, just a brief overview of SAP Signavio Transformation Suite. Obviously, they have different types of capabilities. One of the main capabilities that we're going to touch base on today is going to be around the collaboration hub or the process manager, for example. That is one area that integrates with SAP Cloud ALM. And again, it's a standard or native integration between these two tools. But if you do have Signavio and Cloud ALM, you're able to integrate these fairly, I would say, easy without having to do any type of additional, let's say, development and etc. But that's the area primarily we're going to touch around base. But however, Cloud ALM does also offer different capabilities such as journey modeler, process governance, process automation, process insights, and process intelligence as well. So those are some different tools that you can take advantage as well on top of just process manager. Around the Cloud ALM overview, obviously, it's an application where it will help you through your implementation, but also on the operation side. Our goal today is going to be just to go through the implementation side. For example, how do you design, build, test, and deploy a solution with the different capabilities that it has? But however, it's also very important to understand that, for example, if you have live applications today, or once you go live, how do you support them by using, for example, different KPIs and different analytics in order for you to detect problems, to analyze them, correct them, and also there's some automation as well that you can do with operations in order to detect those issues and automatically, for example, close if they're not necessarily issues and etc. Or take corrective action, I would say, in some cases as well. But that's another webinar that we can, or if you're interested on the operation side, that we can help you with as well. But in today's webinar, we're going to primarily go through these 4 different phases within Cloud ALM and together with Signavio as well. So on the implementation side, obviously, it supports all customers, all SAP customers as well, but also if you have non-SAP solutions that are integrated with SAP, you can use SAP Cloud ALM because it can support those non-SAP requirements as well, as long as they are integrated. It's an out-of-the-box, meaning it's pre-configured for you minus the project, for example, setting up a project or something in that nature. Other than that, the solution it's pre-configured, where you can start using it from day one as long as you do the onboarding. It provides different features, functions, processes to start pretty much from the fit to standard workshops all the way to deploying a solution, helping you with transports and etc. Using Cloud ALM to import them into a productive environment. Also, last but not least, it's fairly easy to onboard users, and once you do that, pretty much everyone can, depending on what roles you provide them, they are able to utilize the application immediately. Now, the intention of Cloud ALM on the implementation side is primarily to try and consume those best practices content. This is where, for example, the consumption of those best practices is going to start from Signavio. We're going to push them into SAP Cloud ALM during this webinar. And then our goal is to really start to do a fit to standard workshop and really design that solution based on those processes that we sent from Signavio. Then we'll go through a build phase where we'll manage a couple of activities using tasks and features and etc. within Cloud ALM, including creating transports. And then last but not least is testing. After we do the design and build, how do we use Cloud ALM in order for us to test that entire solution, including use some of the standard test cases as well that maybe are let's say offered by SAP, where you can automatically, for example, make some small modifications and execute those test cases to test the application and make sure it works. And then how do you orchestrate that deployment of transports into a productive environment, or let's say pre-production or production, using like a mass import, for example, and how do you do the pre-checks as well. All of this information that we go through, it's always going to be tracked in Cloud ALM, so you'll have a full traceability of this entire process from design to build, test, and also on the deployment side as well. Now, the first slide in here primarily talks about how do we, for example, initiate a SAP Signavio process diagram. So let's take an example where, for example, you modeled a process within SAP Signavio that has different processes in it, and then once you finish that process, how do you publish that into SAP Cloud ALM, where now that design or the build team can actually take this process and start possibly capturing requirements or designing that solution. For example, maybe 90% of it fits to the standard SAP. However, then maybe that 10% that you may have integrations, or you may need to extend this application. Therefore, this is where The SAP team in Cloud ALM, for example, will take that process diagram that was pushed from Signavio and then start to identify those gaps and capture requirements. However, within SAP Signavio, we would synchronize. So at any given time when you make any type of changes, we would synchronize that back into SAP Cloud ALM or push that diagram. So therefore, the team can utilize it and can start delivering those requirements. Again, talked a little bit about this in the previous slide, but once you have these process diagrams and within Cloud ALM, you have a couple of different ways how you can create the requirements or document the requirements. So an example is that you could go directly to that process flow, and then depending, on the governance that you set up, and would you like to create those requirements, if it's, for example, at a lower level or at a higher level all the way to the actual process itself. You can create the requirements and start to manage those, for example, include and apply like an approval structure where, for example, you have an approval workflow where an example is only, let's say, an IT architect or a stakeholder can actually approve that requirement before you start any type of build on it. So that gives you at least some governance so you can understand exactly what the requirements can move forward. Now, in addition to that, just creating a requirement and having that approved, it's not sufficient in order for you to deliver, because there's a lot more that goes into that requirement in order to have, let's say, multiple resources in order for you to build that. So how do you do that from a task management perspective? This is where Cloud ALM offers a couple of different options. You can have project tasks such as user stories, or you can have project tasks as an actual task, where you can automatically initiate one directly, for example, within the requirements. So we're tying all of this together, and you can assign this to different team members. So therefore, you can deliver that. The team member can deliver that task, for example, for that specific approved requirement. And then, as you can see here in my screen, for example, for each one of the requirements, you'll also have an approval process where one is approved, another one, for example, is not approved, or no approval is required. So you'll have those different types of workflows that you can have on the requirements directly. Now, within this requirement, once you have all of those tasks created, again, think of a parent and a child relationship. Once the tasks are created, you'll have something like this, for example, where you have all of those specific project tasks or user stories to deliver a specific approved requirement. The goal is that your approved requirement is probably going to remain in a status like in refinement, or it's being build or tested, something like that. However, your task until all of these children below, depending if it's documentation or if it's some type of build activity, or if it's some type of development that you're doing, some type of unit testing, all of that can be captured directly under that requirement. So you'll know all of the actual work and who's doing that work for a specific requirement without impacting and changing the requirement status and etc. In addition to that, one item that I didn't mention in here is the requirement will have all of different artifacts attached. So not necessarily just tasks, but we're going to go into features and etc. But it will have also, for example, the process flow that we talked about. So you'll have the process nodes here, but you also have the solution process flow as well that you can see it directly from there. Now, on the feature side, this is very important because under that requirement, you're also going to create features, which really, at the end of the day, it's your change document it's going to include different transports. And now this is where, for example, you could have SAP some ABAP transports, but then you can also have if you're doing any type of side-by-side development, for example. Therefore, you can have those extensions tied directly in here that they transport from BTP. And in addition to that, you can also have cloud applications such as integration suite, for example, tied directly in here. So you can pretty much manage all of your development either in one feature, or you can create multiple features which it will contain that development. However, we always recommend, for example, if you're working on the same requirement and then you have some work that you're doing on a side-by-side extension, you're doing something in integration suite, something maybe on your ABAP side, that you combine all of those under one feature. So therefore, you know exactly when that's going to go live. It's going to go all together. You're going to push that feature all together into, let's say, into a testing environment or into a production when you go live as well. So it just creates that that use, and it's much easier to control as well from the release team. Now, from a feature workflow perspective, so regardless of the type of transport that you're using, if it's in BTP, integration suite, or just directly in ABAP as well, the workflow is primarily the same. It just depends on the type of environments that you have. So if you have additional environments in here, in my case, we're looking at a dev, QA, and a production, so a 3-tier environment. But if you do add the pre-production, for example, then you just map these different statuses for those as well. But again, the goal is here just to show you that, you know, for each one of the features, you'll have a workflow that a transport is going to go through that needs to be followed, which is in implementation. Obviously, we're doing some type of development or configuration in dev. And then once it goes into testing, successfully tested, ready for production, all of that is happening in QA. The goal is for us just to ensure that we match the status to where the transport is. So therefore, we can always, from a project management perspective, we can always see exactly where the changes are, and we can also plan our testing based on that, including, for example, for ready for production. The goal is for the release management team to just look at the data and understand when this is ready for production and to be deployed. Again, Cloud ALM is going to trace all of this information, and then I have a couple of slides here that I'll show you at the end as well how that's traced. And go into that, which is really around analytics, for example. So any type of build process that we do, and when we say build process, meaning that we did the design, we did, you know, any type of build such as requirements, user stories or tasks, including features, all of that information is going to be tracked directly in here, either by phases, either by sprints. It just depends the type of methodology that you're using, but both will work. But you'll see in here, for example, which phases you have completed, how many planned tasks, how many you have completed, and etc. But you'll have all of that information in here as well if you are behind or not for each one of the phases. Now, to go into more on the test management side, obviously this is slightly a separate topic from everything, but it combines together with the build phase and also including the design. So the testing in SAP Cloud ALM does support cloud and on-prem, SAP and non-SAP applications as well. So for example, nothing stops you from creating a test case that goes beyond the wall of SAP and tests another application that's maybe integrated with SAP as well. So that's what when we talk about SAP and non-SAP, you're able to create that test case that includes those steps that are outside of SAP. It does offer, for example, a structured orchestration, meaning that you can have test cases linked to processes, requirements, and etc. You can from manual testing and automated testing as well. And you can have multiple test cycles, multiple test plans, for example, and etc. I know SAP is bringing a lot of functionality around here, around testing as well, which they're extending the application to where it's more robust for you to be able to have some additional capabilities as well. Now, the important part in here is also does integrate, for example, with SAP, the third-party applications in general, but also with Tricentis. They have a native integration where, for example, you can use that automation from day one and not necessarily having to do any type of extended integrations, for example, where you have to build. To go a little bit more into detailed into the test planning phase, for example, you can have as many test plans or cycles as you need for a testing phase. So you can break this down by, for example, if you have any type of integration testing or if you have regression testing, etc. So you can break these test plans by teams. Anything that you need pretty much is pretty flexible as to what you can do on the testing. You'll have different statuses, and obviously if the test is prepared, if the execution began or not, if how many have, let's say, completed, how many are not, how many have failed, and etc., including if you have any type of defects as well in here. On the execution side, which is very important for your testers, it's fairly easy to use the entire application, where, for example, you'll have a test case with steps, you have instructions, you have expected results, and then you have a path to test or fail, for example, directly from here. And then you can also log different comments, pictures, screenshots, etc., including any type of defects, and relate that defect directly to the test case that you're executing. You can also do this, for example, we're only showing the manual test execution, but if, for example, you have a test case that's automated, it's obviously not going to include the steps, but from a execution perspective, you would still go to a test case, and then you would just click on execute, and that obviously it's going to run in the background, let's say in Tricentis, for example, and then it's going to send back the pass or fail. Therefore, then you can start the defect management process if you need to as well. But all of that information, for example, will also be logged and passed back into SAP Cloud ALM. Now, to talk about traceability, starting with, and why is it important, for example, including for the clean core methodology or pillars that we talked about, to start with, starting with processes and not extending them to where, for example, you have to build these extensions that require a lot of work. The goal is that, for example, we select those processes that come from SAP, modify as little as we can, and then we create requirements in Cloud ALM, we approve them, and then we go through the entire item, which we either create tasks, for example, or user stories, and also create features when we need to. But the idea is here that, for example, as we are going through this process, you'll have some gate checks, for example, where if when a requirement is ready to test, you'll know if you'll have a readiness check to see, for example, if you are able to execute any type of integration testing, let's say, for example, and then you'll also have that defect process as well, where you can go back and forth. And then in addition to that, once you're done with your test execution phase, at that point we would go into our readiness for deployment. This is where, for example, you'll have the release management team take over the entire process, and then they would clearly see what has been executed and what has not, based on the data that they have within Cloud ALM. And all of this information will be automatically be tracked within these 3 different reports. You'll have a solution process traceability, where you automatically can see which processes, for example, you delivered, and then how they are tracked by each requirement. You also have a requirements traceability, which is a step deeper to look into what the requirement and what are the traceability for those requirements. And then again, if you're using user stories or tasks, this is where you can use that to go into a more detailed level and see those granular tasks that were delivered for each one of the requirements. From a analytics side or project status, you'll have a project status overview that gives you all different tables in here that you can also slightly modify, meaning you can modify the widgets, not necessarily customize them. You'll also have an analytics overview, which has all of this information, including the traceability, which is very important. And then last but not least here, around the solution process traceability, this is where, for example, it's very important to understand the processes that you designed, and then how many requirements you have for each one of those processes, and depending if you use a user story or project tasks or both, for example, what status they're in, including any type of documents, for example. So even if you're using SharePoint documents, you can always have some type of link, for example, where we're able to see that there is an actual, like, let's say a functional spec or something in that nature, depending on your company documents that you decide to use, including test preparation, for example, if you have a test plan or not, test if anything was executed, and defects as well. So everything that we've talked about today, as long as those items are let's say, created and managed within Cloud ALM and Signavio, you'll be able to track them directly within this solution process traceability. Okay, so in today's demo, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and then we're going to navigate to a SAP Signavio screen to begin with. I'm going to refresh this, most likely it timed out. But again, as I mentioned, Signavio has different types of capabilities, but the one that we're going to look into today primarily is around how this integrates with SAP Cloud ALM. And let's just take an example. I'm going to go ahead and open one of my existing process flows that I have in here that we have designed, which is standard from SAP, for example. And then within this diagram in here, which is primarily a procurement of parts, for example, from a supplier to a central purchasing in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and push this into SAP Cloud ALM. And then in order to do that, you'll have, once you integrate Signavio and SAP Cloud ALM, you'll have a sync with SAP Cloud ALM. And then once you press this button, it will give you a warning message as to, are you sure you want to sync this diagram? Obviously cannot be undone once we do this. So, and any additional edits that we made in here will be a new revision, obviously, within Cloud ALM, and we still need to synchronize it. The goal is here to have a one direction synchronization, meaning that once I push this, I don't anticipate and I should not make any changes in Cloud ALM, and those should only be done within SAP Signavio. So we're going to go ahead and sync that into SAP Cloud ALM. It's going to give me a link, for example, directly to that specific process. And then once you click on that, it should take you automatically into the SAP Cloud ALM process flow that we just pushed in here. So it's automatically done in here. So obviously you're going to have all of that information directly within Cloud ALM. And this is, for example, now where we can start depending on which process, if you want to do it at this process level, or if you want to create it at the process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, given the time that we have, I would need to assign this process flow to a scope. But what I'm going to do is we're just going to go directly into a requirement here. And then we're just going to utilize a specific process to generate a requirement and tie it all together. So let's say, for example, the design of the process flow is done. Now the goal is that we're going to go into the next step, which in my case, I'm going to go ahead and create a new requirement. Okay, so I'm going to enter that name, and then you'll have some additional information here at the bottom that obviously you can fill. In my case, I'm going to say no approval required, but you can always make this mandatory for approval, and then you can have that workflow. And I'm just going to say 10 hours, and then you also have a release in here that you can attach, including the type of time box. In my case, this is already in my explore phase, so we're going to choose that. You have start and end date in here that you can do for the requirements. So we'll do something like in the future in here. I think I went too far, but let's just say we'll do something like this. And then you also have different themes, for example, as well. So in my case, depending on the type of theme that it is in here, you can choose a team. Let's say this is procurement, assigned role, not necessarily a scrum master, but you can decide, for example, who would you like this to assign this specific requirement to. And then you also have users in here, which is not really mandatory, but I'm going to go ahead and assign this to myself. But for now, it tags completely, for example, what you would like to select. But once you do all of this information, for example, then in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select Signavio and then another work stream. But you get the idea, for example, what it takes to create that requirement in here. Once you enter all of the information, you can save that requirement. And then what we're going to do next in here, for example, is I am going to go ahead and tie this requirement to a some additional information in here as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on Edit. We're going to navigate now down to my solution process. Again, two different ways to do this. You can also let me see, just okay, receipts of goods. So that was a solution process that we sent this directly from Signavio. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select that directly. And then it will automatically tie that solution process in here. You can also, for example, again, assign documents. You can assign process notes. So if you have a business process hierarchy, which obviously in most cases, if you are in an SAP project, you'll have some type of BPML that you can assign, including features. But again, this is what we're going to leave this at from a requirement perspective. And then we're going to go ahead and say that we have the design, we have the requirement. Let's say now in our case, it's approved. So we're going to say that it's also in planning. So in this case, once we set to this in planning, we're going to go back, for example, and then in this case in here, either going to create some project tasks, for example, or just assign some in here directly. So a couple of different ways to do that. You can assign a project task maybe that's created already. So let's just say FSD. And then it will automatically tie that project task in here as well. Now, in addition to that, you'll have a link directly to that task where you can navigate to, for example. But also, if I do navigate to a specific task in here, just let me find it very quickly. I can always create also a task, for example, directly from here, either a user story or a task. They're very similar to each other. And then I'm going to navigate down in here, for example, all the way down to the specific requirement. And then I'm going to go ahead and look for that requirement that we just created. So we're going to choose that requirement and then save it. So again, it's very flexible as to how you can create different requirements, for example, for the same task. So now if you navigate back, you should be able to see multiple tasks. So it does not necessarily have to be just one directional. You can have this completed in multiple ways. So now you have both of those tasks in here as children. Now, this is great, but however, in case these are, let's say, just tasks that we need to track the team that, for example, they delivered an FSD, or for example, they did some additional design or a functional spec, technical spec. Think of those type of deliverables that you need for almost every single requirement, including maybe a test plan and etc. Now, in addition to that, not necessarily going to go into the documentation, etc., but you can always assign, for example, documentation in here directly as well. So, for example, if I navigate again, if you wanted to assign some type of documents in here, you can always do that as well, where you can assign different documents directly within this area here as well. Now, on the feature side, a couple of different ways. I can assign a feature directly from here. Or what I can do is, if you are within a requirement, I can decide to create a new feature. And this feature, obviously, it's going to automatically take the name, feature for supplier and purchasing goods. Then I'm going to go ahead and just add at minimum a release that I want to deliver this. I'm going to take the R1 release in my case, and then I'm going to assign this to myself. That's all the information that I am going to add for now, because I want to go into the next step in here for you. And then as soon as that feature is created, it's obviously going to automatically start to build that traceability. So we're going to go back into this feature in here. And then what we'll do is we'll start an implementation. And then a couple of different items in here within, for example, within this feature. So I can either assign, for example, a transport, or what I could do is I could create a transport directly from here. Given the fact that we don't have a lot of time in this demonstration, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead. And if you do decide to create a transport, for example, you can have as many environments as you need in here. In my case, I have 2 source environments, obviously the different targets in here that are going to go to, but it gives you the option if you want to create a customizing workbench, who's the owner of the transport, and etc. And if you don't enter the correct owner, it will always just default to a user. A default user. So you have all of those options from creating a transport. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take an existing transport. So all of these transports in here, for example, that let's say are open, that are not part of Cloud ALM, it's going to show you that list in here, for example. So we'll just take one of the existing transports. And then what I'll do is I'm also going to take a transport from a different environment. If I can find one in here, like a BTP. Let's take this one. But in here, for example, depending on the type of sources that you have, so again, integration suite, BTP, including SAP, you would tie all of those transports within this area in here. So therefore, for example, as we are pushing these changes to a different environment, so for example, if we were to release both of these transports again, it will automatically release both of them and it will make them ready for the next environment. So it will automatically push those transports for us to be released, for example, and then you'll be able to move into the next stage, for example, such as now we're going to hand it over to test because obviously we're going to release and import these true transports directly in here. But that would be primarily how we would either create or how we would, for example, release transports directly from Cloud ALM, including, for example, if you want to do this, it's going to take about a minute or two for this to be released. However, we would be able to copy, transport of copies, release them, and also deploy this en masse as well, for example, as you get down that later stage. So as you see, for example, in my right-hand side in here, I have an option here to deploy to production. So for example, if this is in the right status and you have multiple features, you're able to deploy these changes en masse directly into a productive environment as well. Okay, now to go into a testing phase as well. So you'll have these different tasks in here, but obviously now the majority of the work, once we have the changes into, let's say, a QA environment, would be primarily around the test management. So you'll have something like this. For example, we can have as many test plans as you would like, but just let's take this for example. We're testing this specific test plan. Within this specific test plan, you'll have different test cases that you can execute. So you'll have, for example, prepare test cases, and we'll also show you if these test cases are manual or if you wanted to add some automatic test cases as well. Fairly easy, for example, to add any type of specific test cases in here. You can add sequence, you can assign, etc. And then you can also add additional test cases if you need to as well directly in this area as needed. And then from an execution perspective, so we'll go back to the home screen. Now, from an execution perspective with testers, this is where test planning obviously is done by a test manager, but from an execution perspective, once you come in here, you can, it looks like this one, I executed some steps, but however, as a tester, it's fairly easy what you can do in here, pass, fail, obviously with conditions. But then in addition to that, this is where it's very important where, for example, we can either assign or we can create, for example, specific defects. And that would go into entire defect management and strategy, how you would do that within the test case. So again, anything that you add directly within this here will automatically tie it back into the traceability, which we're really going to go into the next case in here. So we're going to go back into the home screen, and then go into the implementation side again. And then now we'll just take a look into primarily into the analytics. And then there's a ton of reports in here. However, the one that we really want to look into, it's going to be around the process management traceability. Just to kind of give you an idea, so what we did is we took one of the process flows in here, for example, and we kind of went through the different areas. So we went through, for example, on creating one or two additional requirements, for example, then also having some user stories, having different project tasks, documents, is a test prepared, then anything, for example, that you go within this area in here, and I go into that specific requirement, it's obviously going to show me how many requirements I have specifically for that process, how many user stories, for example, how many project tasks, if the test is prepared, for example, how many test plans I have specific to that process flow, if the execution was done, for example, how many passed, how many failed, if I have any type of defect as well, including to a couple of libraries in here, but I don't have any data for that. So that's pretty much for the traceability as well. Now, I think we're at time here, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and then we'll go to see if you guys have any type of questions, and we'll try to answer this.
Awesome, Baldwin, thanks very much. We covered a huge variety of topics here, helping to guide how you can do clean core by making sure that you're taking advantage of the latest, greatest capabilities of SAP by starting with your business process, going through and mapping your requirements, keeping track of all of that, and then managing your transport. So each one of those could be its own deep dive topic. We're happy to go into more depth. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat. One question that I have for you, Baldwin, I know that we talked about various tools. Can you talk about some of the tools we have to connect up this Cloud ALM view with tools like Jira, Azure DevOps, both for the requirements and user story side, as well as just how you can manage transports? What are the different options there?
Yeah, I mean, multiple different options. So you mentioned a couple of different tools, but obviously we can also utilize Jira with Cloud ALM, including Azure DevOps as well from an integration perspective, especially to manage those non-SAP requirements. So that's possible and we do have an bi-directional integration where you can change status and different things that we did in Cloud ALM directly from those third-party tools, if that's I would say a tool of your choice.
Okay, awesome. And how long does it take to get those kind of tools implemented?
Effort-wise, I mean, very little. They're obviously tools that are almost native integrations, I would say.
Okay, great. Awesome. So I think that's all we have for today. Thank you, Baldwin, for the deep dive into this topic. We covered a lot, but at the same time, we only kind of scratched the surface. There's a lot more that can be revealed. So if you are looking to do a project, or if you're trying to figure out how to kind of unify your process for changes, whether it's for projects or maintenance updates, and you'd like to discuss this further, best approach would be to kind of reach out to us directly, and we can set up a guided demonstration. We can have a discover call to kind of learn a little bit more about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then we can talk through some of your options and even go into a sort of a deeper demonstration on how you can build a unified process across SAP, BTP, and non-SAP application changes. Thanks very much for joining us. If you do want to get in touch, again, best option is probably go to our CoreALM.com website, click on the Talk to an Expert button in the top right-hand corner of your screen, fill out the form, and we'll be in touch with you, and we can discuss your needs specifically. If you're watching the recording, thanks for sticking all the way through. And again, hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you all, and thank you, Baldwin. Have a great rest of your day.